The promise sounded simple. In France, the guillotine became the official method in 1792, sold as a fast and humane execution. That claim broke almost at once. The debate shrank to the last moments after decapitation. Witnesses said severed heads still moved and looked aware for a few seconds.
Executions put power on display. Rank decided the killing method. Squares made the warning visible. A nobleman convicted of a serious crime could be taken out by sword or axe, and that counted as an honorable end for his rank, a death tied to status and watched in public. A common criminal got the rope, where hanging meant slow strangulation at the end of a noose, sometimes lasting several minutes before the body finally stopped moving. When rulers wanted a stronger message, they used breaking on the wheel. The executioner smashed arms and legs with a heavy iron bar, then the spine, and left the victim strapped to a raised cartwheel on a post, alive and conscious, until shock and blood loss finished the job, sometimes after hours. Beheading sat at the softer end of the scale, but even that mercy depended on the hand that lifted the blade, the angle of the swing, and the force behind it. That dependence surfaced in England on February 8, 1587. At Fotheringhay Castle, the promise of a clean, controlled beheading broke down in front of 300 witnesses. Mary Stuart, the former Queen of Scotland, had spent 19 years imprisoned by her cousin, Elizabeth I of England. She was 44 years old. A trained swordsman with a sharp blade could end the act in one stroke. Mercy rested on skill. Most executions used an axe instead, a heavier weapon, harder to control, and less forgiving if the condemned moved at the wrong moment or the executioner misread the angle. That is what happened here. 3 blows. Then the executioner used the blade's edge to finish the cut, and the people who had gathered left Fotheringhay in visible shock. Scenes like that kept repeating, and by the 1780s, France still kept the same public ritual. Crowds came for a swift, formal death, then turned angry when the killing dragged and the pain stayed on display. That display mattered. Officials left suffering visible because the message had to be visible too. 6 months into the revolution, on December 1, 1789, physician and deputy Joseph Ignace Guillotin rose in the French National Assembly, and the chamber answered his proposal with laughter. That laughter grew out of a legal argument, not a technical sketch. France was 6 months into the revolution, and lawmakers were drafting a new code after declaring every citizen equal before the law. Guillotine carried that principle to the scaffold, one rule for all. Joseph Ignace Guillotin was a physician and deputy, not a craftsman presenting a finished device. His point was simple. If France kept executions, an aristocrat and a laborer had to die the same way. Same method, same speed, and as little suffering as possible. So he proposed mechanical beheading that did not depend on an executioner's skill, strength, or mood. No reliance on a swordsman's hand. The law would give every condemned person one identical procedure, delivered at the same pace each time. Then he made the line that broke the room. He said the victim would feel only a slight sensation at the back of the neck. The chamber burst out laughing. By the time the new code arrived in 1791, the laughter had vanished. The law now ordered one punishment for every condemned prisoner: decapitation. Noble or laborer, the sentence matched. On paper, the lawmakers had an answer. In practice, France lacked trained executioners. That was the obstacle. Training enough swordsmen to deliver clean beheadings would take years, and the courts needed a method much sooner. So the state turned the proposal into a real project. Antoine Louis took the job. He was the permanent secretary of the French Academy of Surgery, one of the highest medical posts in the country. Tobias Schmidt helped him assemble a working prototype by early 1792. One detail mattered most. Louis and Schmidt set the blade at 45 degrees, not straight like an axe, so it cut on a diagonal instead of depending on one heavy vertical blow. That blade angle became the central feature. That cutting angle mattered only after the body entered a strict sequence. The condemned went face down. Assistants strapped the person to a flat bascule, then tipped it forward until the neck lay horizontal. The throat rested over the slot. A curved wooden lunette held the neck,
and a matching upper piece locked it down. Then the rest moved fast. A blade of about 7 kilograms dropped from about 3 meters and ran down greased wooden rails. From restraint to release, the whole procedure took only seconds. No interval remained. On April 17, 1792, they tested the prototype at Bicêtre Hospital in Paris on fresh corpses. It worked. 8 days later, on April 25th, they used it on a living man for the first time. That man was Nicolas Jacques Pelletier, executed at the Place de Grève in central Paris. The crowd expected several minutes of visible suffering because older executions had trained them to watch pain play out in stages. Instead, the action ended almost at once. Witnesses described confusion more than satisfaction. In those first days, people called the machine Louisette or Louison after Antoine Louis. The dispute moved from steel to memory. Louisette and Louison came first. Both names came from Antoine Louis. Guillotin was a doctor, and he had spent years speaking in public about execution reform. That made the link easy, and his own name stuck to the machine anyway. He kept trying to pull away from it. He died in 1814 at 75. His family asked France to rename it. The government refused. The name stayed. By spring 1793, the government had given the blade a permanent job. France used the guillotine for the first time on April 25, 1792. In less than a year, it had become the main tool of state executions. War closed in. By late 1792, France was fighting Austria and Prussia, and both monarchies wanted the revolution crushed. Bread was scarce, prices were collapsing, rival factions fought for power, and radicals demanded the destruction of suspected enemies. That crisis changed the center of power. On April 6, 1793, France created the Committee of Public Safety. 12 men sat on it, took control, and turned emergency rule into daily procedure. The first major public signal came on January 21, 1793. Louis XVI was executed. Once emergency rules settled into routine, the National Convention made its clearest statement in the center of Paris. In January 1793, deputies voted on the fate of Louis XVI, and on January 21st, they sent the 38-year-old king to the guillotine at Place de la Révolution, the square now called Place de la Concorde. He had lived under guard since June 1791, after he and his family tried to leave France disguised as servants and were stopped at Varennes near the Belgian border. Europe had seen kings deposed before, but not a reigning monarch publicly put to death by his own government after a formal legal procedure, and every royal court understood that signal. The second signal came 9 months later on the same square. On October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette, aged 37, went to the scaffold after about 2.5 months alone in the conciergerie, cut off from her children while the youngest was 8. Paris had now seen 2 court-ordered executions of the dynasty in 1 year. On October 16, 1793, Marie Antoinette was executed in the same square. With the royal cases closed, the label spread fast. From September 1793 to July 1794, the guillotine moved from rare political spectacle to routine sentencing. Names kept piling up. The Paris Revolutionary Tribunal alone handed down about 2,600 death sentences. Across France, the official count reached about 16,500. More died unseen. Historians estimate another 10,000 to 40,000 people died in prison without any trial. First came aristocrats, priests who refused the oath, and suspected foreign spies. Then the label widened again. The law of suspects, passed on September 17th, widened arrests, and the law of 22nd prairial on June 10th shortened the road to conviction. A denunciation could start it. A missed grain delivery could finish it. By mid-1794, grain merchants, farmers blamed for failed quotas, and ordinary citizens reported by neighbors all went to the scaffold. In June and July, Paris executed 50 to 60 people a day. That person changed more than the list of the condemned. It changed the work around the blade. Charles-Henri Sanson had been Paris's chief executioner since 1778, and his family had held the office since 1688. He had already executed Louis XVI, and in the Terror, he carried out hundreds more. In June and July, the city sent 50 to 60 people a day to his scaffold. Later, Sanson said the pace had become unmanageable, so his team worked in shifts to maintain the guillotine through the day. Authorities then moved the executions from Place de la Révolution to Place du Trône Renversé, now Place de la Nation, because blood from the scaffold polluted water in a nearby fountain. On July 28, 1794, the guillotine reached Maximilien Robespierre. The daily routine finally reached one of its loudest offenders. On July 27, 1794, officials arrested Maximilien Robespierre, a 36-year-old lawyer and politician from the Committee of Public Safety. Many in Paris saw him as the clearest voice of the Terror. Then came the scaffold. During the arrest, a gunshot tore through his lower jaw. By the next day, the wound sat under a blood-soaked bandage. Officials brought him to Place de la Révolution, now Place de la Concorde. The executioner pulled the bandage away before locking his neck into place. Robespierre cried out. That cry fixed the meaning. The man linked to the scale of the killings now faced the same blade in public view. On July 28, 1794, Robespierre was beheaded at Place de la Révolution. Once Robespierre was gone, the attention at the scaffold shifted to the seconds after the fall. Since 1792, France had used the guillotine for civil executions, so the same question returned again and again in the same public squares. Doctors stood nearby. Crowds watched below. From the first beheadings, witnesses kept reporting blinks, jaw movement, and changes in expression after the head was cut away. Arguments started there, beside the scaffold. Was that awareness still present, or only the last automatic signals passing through dying nerve tissue? The most famous early case was Charlotte Corday. She was 24. She came from Normandy. On July 13, 1793, she stabbed Jean-Paul Marat, one of the Revolution's most influential and feared radical journalists, and the man behind L'Ami du Peuple. Marat was sitting in a medicinal bath. He used it to treat a painful skin condition. Corday was guillotined on July 17, 1793. The blade fell. Her head was separated from her body. An assistant picked up her head. He held it up for the crowd. Then he slapped her hard across the cheek. Multiple witnesses said her face visibly reacted. They saw an expression of offense or anger. The story spread across Paris within hours. Nobody could agree on what it meant. It was impossible to ignore. Doctors and scientists started treating the question seriously. It was no longer mere street gossip. That change reached the scaffold itself. On June 28, 1905, French doctor Gabriel Bourriot took his place beside the scaffold at the prison in the city of Orleans. He chose that position before the execution began. He wanted to observe Henri Longueuil at the moment the blade fell. His note reads like a protocol. In the first seconds after the cut, Bourriot saw Longueuil's eyelids and lips twitch in uneven movements, then grow still. He called Longueuil's name once, loud and clear. The eyelids opened, the eyes turned toward Bourriot's face and held that gaze for about 5 or 6 seconds. Then he called the name a second time. The eyes opened again, made contact again, and then closed for good. Bourriot later published the report in the French medical journal Archives d'Anthropologie Criminelle. That gave one old claim a medical record. He left certain he had not watched a reflex. For him, Longueuil had remained conscious for a brief span. That judgment rests on a very narrow interval, and the body sets that interval in the neck. The brain stays conscious only while fresh, oxygenated blood keeps arriving without a break. 2 large carotid arteries deliver that flow through the neck, and the guillotine blade cuts through both in a single drop. Then pressure collapses. Inside the brain, blood pressure falls to almost zero within 1 to 2 seconds after those arteries are severed. Fighter pilots under sudden extreme G-forces lose consciousness in about 5 to 10 seconds because the pressure shift drives blood away from the brain. Animal studies that stop brain blood flow just as abruptly point to much the same timeline. So even if Borio described Languille with full accuracy, he was watching the outer edge of what the brain could still support. His observation belongs to the first seconds, before the loss of blood supply wins. That narrow window pushed the issue from witness memory to instruments. In 2011, Radboud University in the Netherlands recorded brain activity in rats immediately after decapitation, and the paper appeared in PNAS. The first signal mattered. For about 3 to 5 seconds, researchers saw a brief rise in gamma oscillations. In a conscious brain, those waves track active perception. Then the curve dropped fast. The team stayed careful. They did not claim the rats remained conscious, and they did not turn the result into a human verdict. But the study still set a boundary. The brain did not go dark at the exact instant blood flow ended. Activity then kept falling, and by around 30 seconds the rat readings stopped. What remained after that belonged to reflex. When the readings went silent, witnesses still saw movement. Blinking did not prove awareness. Jaw motion stayed automatic. Faces changed in silence. The brainstem is the lower part of the brain, sitting at the top of the spinal cord. Once blood flow stops, the higher brain stops working. But the brainstem can keep basic reflexes going for a short time. Those reflexes do not need conscious thought. They are the body's last automatic signals, not proof of a mind still watching the world. Charlotte Corday's flushed cheek had a different cause. The slap widened the blood vessels in her face. After 1794, the guillotine kept going for 183 years. That long run changed slowly. The change was gradual, not sudden. In the first half of the 1800s, executions left public squares and moved into prison courtyards. The crowds were part of it. They came in huge numbers, and guards found them harder to control. France also worried about image. It wanted to look like the home of modern civilization and human rights, not a place where deaths happened besides street food vendors and children. The last public guillotine execution in French history came on June 17, 1939. It happened outside Saint-Pierre prison in Versailles. The condemned man was Eugène Weidmann. He was German, and a court had convicted him of 6 murders. All night, people gathered to get a better view. Someone filmed the execution. The footage got out. The reaction turned sharply negative. The government moved every future execution behind prison walls permanently. That policy held until September 10, 1977, when prison executions in France ended. Behind those walls, the rout ended in Marseille. On September 10, 1977, French officials executed 28-year-old Hamida Djandoubi in the courtyard of Beaumet's prison in southern France. A court convicted him of kidnapping, torturing, and murdering 21-year-old Elisabeth Bousquet after he forced her into prostitution. Fewer than a dozen prison officials watched. No public notice went out. Djandoubi became the last person killed by guillotine anywhere in the world.